Hello listeners, I'm your speaker Casey, and this is part 2 of the Michael Balaban CEDU interview. I won't mess around with too much of an introduction, but as I mentioned in the previous episode, this interview does come with a trigger warning of child abuse and suicide. Through all of this, through all of your time at Seadoo, did you ever feel like you'd ever become fully compliant? Were you ever 100% in agreement?
Myself, no. And that's one of the reasons that I had such a rough go of it. I couldn't get with the program from the beginning. From day one, I realized there was something incredibly wrong about this place. I didn't know what Synanon was, but I knew from my first rap that nobody's supposed to treat you this way in life. This is wrong, and that I'm not going to go with it. There was an element of it where you had to sacrifice any type of meaningful friendship because you were constantly required to report on your fellow students and their breaking of agreements. If you didn't, you were in trouble yourself. So everyone around you was a rat. No matter what you did, somebody was going to bring you into a rap and lambaste you and tear you apart in it. Doesn't matter what you did. It was students, staff, everybody. The entire culture was so objectionable to me in the way that I was brought up, I just couldn't go with it. Besides that, I was a, favorite of Russ Decker. Russ Decker and I were in a 24/7 power struggle where his methods towards me, he didn't want me to go with the program. He wanted me as his punching bag.
Okay.
So even if I tried to get with it, the guy in charge of me, Russ Decker, wouldn't have it. Oh, and as you mentioned about that documentary, The Pharmacist, I've been through that ringer too. After my injuries in Afghanistan, the VA was very big on prescribing heavy doses of opiates to me. And I was, combined with some other things, it was to the point where they were prescribing me amphetamines so that I could survive the side effects of the high doses of opiates.
Whoa, oh my goodness.
So I've been through that ringer too. And yes, there was a bit of a reminiscence towards being at CEDU, going through that with the VA. These days I have other methods of dealing with pain and things of that nature, but you know, it is very much similar. So they say it's for compassionate use, but really it's not.
It's just for corporate gain.
Mm-hmm.
I just found it so shocking, the amount of different industries that were just benefiting off the backs of all the children being sent to, and still being sent to schools such as CEDU. So many of them, as I covered in the last episode, have had to close down because of abuse allegations. From going to court and having to fight all the legal battles of people actually coming forward. Because abuse culture, people are speaking out now, so it's not as easy to cover it up in this day and age, which is unfortunate, because all of you people that suffered in the 80s and 90s and the early 2000s are only now being given that platform to be able to speak about these things. And these people have made their millions of dollars. These people have already made their money.
Yeah. We can definitely get into that. There's some very powerful folks who are profiting from these types of institutions and have from the beginning. We're talking about billions of dollars over the years, and that still profit today.
Mm-hmm.
So they evolve, they change ownership, but the program components stay the same.
Just sometimes the inside lingo changes slightly.
Right. For example, right now, Universal Behavioral Health is the company that owns and operates 3 the 3 remaining Northern Idaho CEDU programs.
Right.
I haven't seen their curriculum, but as I understand from testimony of people who have been to the United Behavioral Health versions of the CEDU schools, they brought a lot of it with them. So a lot of the Synanon curriculum still exists to this day.
Despite CEDU going bankrupt and being bought
Correct.
by the Brown schools, and then the Brown schools declaring bankruptcy and officially closing the doors of CEDU, actually, it's still in operation.
Absolutely. Just another company came in.
And do you feel like the programs are successful? Do you feel you were rehabilitated in any way? Did you manage to grow emotionally?
Personally, no. Personally, I didn't have the chance. I was only there for a year. I didn't finish out the whole 2.5 years. I never got out of discovery in my entire year there.
You just you were put back
kept
a peer
getting
group.
put back a peer group, group. And by the end of it, I would have stayed for about 4 years, even if I had decided I was going to get an agreement. I would have been 19 or 20 by the time I graduated.
Decker just didn't want to see you go?
No, not at all. I was too useful as a punching bag.
I wonder what he'd say if he spoke to you today. I wonder if he's still alive.
He works in the global security department for Walt Disney Corporation.
Oh, wow. So
according to his LinkedIn.
Still surrounding himself with children, just a little bit from the outside, from the periphery.
Now he works for House of Mouse.
So other than CEDU and Descent, were there any other programs, emotional growth programs that you attended or were part of?
Well, after my year at CEDU, I was pulled. I was one of the very lucky ones.
Okay.
Ordinarily, resistance like I had would put me into Provo Canyon or Northwest Academy at the time. But my parents had financial issues. They had set a 1 year, the same as the judge. And after 1 year to the day, my parents decided A, it was too expensive, B, the judge's required time was over, and C, I was making zero progress. Mm-hmm. The school even admitted that. CEDU admitted that. So they took me out and put me into a more reform crossed with prep school out in Connecticut called the Woodhull School.
Okay.
That one had a bit less of a behavioral modification curriculum, a bit more of an academic one.
Right.
In the end, I would have had to go to high school for an extra year. So at 18, I dropped out, got myself a GED and went to a transitional program in Bend, Oregon. I cannot remember the name of it, unfortunately, for the life of me. Okay. I was there for 2 months. And then my parents got tired of the whole industry and it was over. I turned 18 and went home, started working in the family business for a little while.
Okay.
Down the road, I had made a contact and somehow I had stayed friends. I don't know if I would say friends, but I had retained contact with the admissions director of CEDU, the ex-one, Saul Rudman. And Saul Rudman had seen me struggling post-CEDU and ended up giving me a job at a school that he ran down in Mexico called Positive Impact.
Okay.
That one I worked at for about 3 to 4 months. It was very much like CEDU, like being back at it. And due to personal reasons, after about 3-4 months, I left there. Okay. I worked as a consultant for Saul Rudman, again, with his venture Coronado Academy of Costa Rica, which was more of a transitional living program.
Right.
But in the later days of CEDU, you started noticing that the programs that were spouting up were opening overseas as opposed to in the United States.
Right.
Both league growing regulation and to, as they put it, bring kids further out of their element.
And it's my understanding that Bill Lane was actually operating worldwide at one point as well.
Absolutely. Bill Lane and Associates was the first and the largest of the therapeutic transport companies.
So it always goes back to Synanon. It always goes back to Synanon and Seadoo and that initial.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Due to the dates that it was formed, I mean, there are some early innovators of schools, like the Elan School, which you touched on a bit, and Straight Ink, and the list goes on and on and on. There are a few Venn diagrams you can look at online that show the evolution, but CEDU was the original back in 1967 that was literally formed by Synanon members with a pure Synanon format. Mm-hmm. That format changed over time, and over time, more and more schools opened up, inspired by CEDU and Synanon, with different variations of the curriculum, but always in some way tying back to attack therapy, attachment therapy, or primal scream therapy, all done by untrained and uncertified ex-member staff.
And always with unwilling adolescents as participants.
The big difference between a CEDU resident and a Synanon member was the fact that we were sent there. Our parents were conned, the same as we were. Mm-hmm. Our parents knew what Synanon was, but they had no idea that it was affiliated with CEDU. When the tie came out and I talked to my folks and I said, "Did you know?" They said, "You're kidding me." They were shocked that it was actual. They knew what Synanon was, but they had no idea that it was Synanon methodology and program brought to unwilling adolescents.
I'd made a note here to actually ask you if you did sit down with your parents after CEDU and talk through everything with them.
They are just as much the victim as I am. Mm-hmm. If you listen to the Lost Kids podcast and listen to Daniel Yuen, a CEDU student from 2004, 1 year before the schools were closed down, he ran away from the school, never to be seen again. His parents give a very heartfelt interview to the podcasters, and it's hard for me as a survivor not to relate to them. My parents are the same way. They were at the end of their rope, the same as my parents were. They felt in a catch-22. They had to send me to a program according to the judge. They felt I needed the help. Mm-hmm. And they were sold a false bill of goods the same as we were. I mean, as clueless as I was about what the place was the day I got there, my parents were even more so. And we weren't allowed to communicate to them what was actually going on in any way, shape, or form.
So when you say you're not allowed to communicate with them, what do you mean by that specifically?
Well, we were given a phone call home for 15 minutes every 2 weeks.
Okay.
That phone call was in an administration office with either a CEDU employee or a senior student or resident in attendance, like your big brother or big sister.
Okay, so somebody in agreement.
Right. If at any point you started saying, "Mom, Dad, you got to get me out of here," you started describing what people said to you in raps, the attacks you were getting, things of that nature. If you started crying, "I can't take it." If you tried to say this staff member did this, they would literally hang up on you and then kick you out of the room, call your parents back, start reciting all sorts of things that you had said in raps that they didn't know about to demonstrate exactly why you needed to be there and why you were going through such a hard time and asking to be sent home.
And some of this stuff that you disclosed in raps was completely false.
Oh, absolutely.
In the first place.
Absolutely.
And
there were a few things I had to tell my parents after the fact. No. I just told them that so they would leave me the hell alone during that rap.
It's not surprising that when parents are being told by a judge a professional of the legal system, that this is what is best for their child and this is what needs to happen.
It wasn't just a judge. At that point in the early 90s, the words of Nancy Reagan and her favorite program, Straight Ink, were ringing in the heads of every judge, educational consultant, news media outlet, parents, everyone. No one had any clue that CEDU was Synanon, and instead it was lauded and heralded as the only way to get your kids straightened out. So all the powers that be were 100% behind it.
You did mention previously that there were writing assignments that you might be given if you were out of agreement. And
we'll go into like the full times. One of the severest punishments you could get at CEDU was called a full time.
Right.
In their vernacular, it basically meant full time punishment.
Right.
You woke up in the morning, you were on bans, meaning you could not speak to or acknowledge the existence of anyone in the school except a specific staff member and one specific student.
Okay.
You would do your morning routine, your morning chores, come down to breakfast where you would sit alone at a table in the dining room and do writing assignments in a journal. They would hand you a notebook, like a scholastic notebook.
Okay.
And at the top of each page, they would add another question. Like one page would be, why do I feel the need to lie to my parents? The next page is, why do I treat my parents the way I do? The next page was, how do I feel my parents, how do I think my parents feel when I do this?
Okay.
The next page was, how does it influence other students or when I do this? And they would give you 20 pages and you would have to write the entire page as an answer, single space, no redundancies, this, that. If you did, you'd do it over. They would have no end to the questions they would give you. They would last the entire time you were on the full time. When you finished breakfast and an hour or so of writing assignments, it was straight out to your stump or whatever work assignment they had you on. You would break for an hour lunch, in which case you would sit alone at your table again, do more writing assignments while you eat.
Goodness.
And then after lunch, right back to your work assignment, digging out your stump or building a garden or hauling manure up a hill from the middle school to the high school to fill some field that was all dirt in the first place. And then when you were done, hey, shovel that manure back in the wheelbarrow, bring it back down to the middle school. We're talking work assignments for the sake of work.
Right. And
once those were done in the evening, you would come back for dinner where you would sit alone, eat your meal, do more writing assignments, and then you'd spend 2 to 3 hours doing pots and pans on dishes until it was time to go back to the dorm and go to bed. And that was your day, all day, every day.
It doesn't sound like there was
and mind you, while you're on a full-time, you are the first one they get to in wraps. And they'll usually spend about half of the rap on you.
Okay.
Everything you wrote in your journal and your writing assignments used against you in raps, in profits, and with your parents, anything you disclosed in your dirt lists, in your raps, you couldn't take it out and tell your parents yourself, but they could tell your parents behind your back.
And they would
use it as motivation for them to keep you there.
They'd use your writing assignments as well as disclosures made in raps?
Anything that came out of you was subject to be used against you with your parents or by staff in raps.
I do actually think that the work assignments that they give CEDU residents, they also seem to echo the jobs that the dope fiends had in Synanon, which were the chores and jobs that they would do instead of paying a fee to be a part of Synanon. So even Absolutely. That seems to echo the cult itself.
Well, let's put it this way. The entire time CEDU was in operation, they never had landscapers. They had no need for them. They never had to clean or hire anybody to do that. They had no need for it. It was top to bottom every Saturday. And what wasn't gotten then was gotten by the people who were being disciplined.
I think it was in Medium Anonymous's article, actually, where he said that it was always ready, always picture perfect and ready for people to come and have a look, almost like
Absolutely.
It's just brochure ready for parents and potential new clients or residents to come and have their tour.
Absolutely.
Do you ever follow or keep in touch with any of the other CEDU survivors?
Unfortunately not. I know that the last one was this last May. I don't know whether it got off or not because of COVID, but there are those, particularly those who actually finished the program, got all the way through it, who swear by it, who say that it saved their lives. There will always be those, and there's those from Synanon as well.
Mm-hmm.
They are much more likely to keep touch with each other than those of us who were traumatized by our experiences.
Are they this similar types of people that would end up potentially being staff members at CEDU?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And how much of an influence do you think CEDU had overall on the troubled teen industry?
Oh, wow. In my research and the history I've dug up, it is the original. The original. Before CEDU, there was only Synanon.
Mm-hmm.
Chuck Dieterich's attack therapy method was almost invented by him,
mm-hmm.
at least popularized and mainstreamed. It was only pre-1966-67, the only place you could really go to find it was Synanon. So Seadoo starting up was kind of the original. At the same time Seadoo started up, a year or two or 3 or 4 after, others started sprouting
mm-hmm.
up as well. But as far as I found in my research, the only one that stayed 100% true to Synanon was Seadoo. From the get-go, it evolved the same way that Synanon did.
Mm-hmm.
Aside from the non-graduating and the Imperial Marines and the let's make this a religion and Chuck's now God, it was more of when Synanon went non-smoking, Seadoo went non-smoking. When Synanon was out there selling raffle tickets, Seadoo was out there selling raffle tickets.
Okay.
It was, as Synanon evolved early, Seadoo very much kept up under Mel Wasserman.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't until Synanon completely blew up in the mid to late 70s when Chuck, screwed everything up with those
mm-hmm.
Imperial Marines, that Seadoo 100% individuated from it, to the point of taking Bill Lane's in-house escort service and making him incorporate as his own business that was contracted on, because Bill was way too involved in Synanon to officially be a part of Seadoo. That would have tied him together.
You definitely have the anti-cult hysteria of the late 70s as well, after everything that happened in Jonestown. And I feel like because Seadoo was policing itself and didn't have a leader, so to speak, that called himself the Messiah and the next coming of God and these types of things.
He didn't call himself that, but the staff called him that. Mel was Chuck.
Yeah, I have read things.
You read the things when the school closed. Mm-hmm. They looked at him like he was the Messiah. His word was golden. His method was the only way to save these kids.
It also seems to be the way that a lot of media outlets would approach Seadoo as well. The way a lot of newspapers and magazines would speak about Seadoo. I think that's what Medium Anonymous struggled with a lot in trying to dig deeper into why Seadoo managed to get away with everything that it did. And that's because it was always seen in such a positive light. It was always praised for the work that it was doing with troubled teens. And then, you had things like Friends of Seadoo, which started up, which was a service to help parents who couldn't afford to send their kids to Seadoo to be able to actually afford to send their kids to Seadoo.
Yeah.
And they would talk about how it saved their family, which is from what you're saying, just confirmation bias because it didn't work for you.
Well, see, that's the thing. I mean, some kids it would. I mean, just like anything, there are some folks in this world who are more predisposed to letting others guide them and make their decisions, who are more predisposed to belief than fact and experience. And I think if you are that type, CEDU may have actually worked for you, but that doesn't excuse the unconscionable nature of its methods. And it also doesn't excuse the damage it did to the other half of the people that went there. And it doesn't excuse the closed culture that allowed predators to proliferate there.
It's worrying as well, thinking about how abuse victims, people that are abused when they are younger, often go on to become abusers in later life. So it's almost worrying what other products CEDU may have created or problems that CEDU may cause today.
I got restrained quite a few times at CEDU. When I, years later, went down to Mexico to work at Positive Impact and had to perform my own first restraint on a student, that's pretty much why I only lasted a couple of months down there.
Yeah, that's not surprising at all. That must be, it's like PTSD.
I personally, yeah, I'm familiar with that. I have been diagnosed with it, a complex PTSD form that takes into account the predispositions to the reactions I had to Afghanistan.
Okay.
Inspired by CEDU.
Right.
You got to understand, CEDU did great things for me in the military, and it did horrible things for me in the military.
I was actually going to ask if you were able to fall in line almost as part of the military.
Well, boot camp was nothing. I had been through it before when I was 16. Drill sergeants had nothing on First Lieutenant Sean O'Connor, who was in charge of PT at Ascent, the gentleman with the staff I mentioned.
Wow, okay,
earlier.
yeah.
His PT when I was 16, 17 years old was nothing compared to the Rangers in my battalion in the Army in basic. So, you know, I thrived there. But then when I got to my unit, confrontation especially, the chain of command was, it was kind of like that 13-year-old kid who just came from the middle school to the high school is now 2 peer groups ahead of you while you're 17 years old and now gets to scream at you incessantly without you being able to do a darn thing about it. That translated into the military. I'd get a horrible senior NCO yelling at me, Sergeant Balaban, you got to do this. And I would just, the way that they came at me created conflict for me.
Right, okay, yeah.
As almost an unconscious reaction planted by CEDU. The PTSD I experience to this day is a combination of affectation of my traumatic brain injury, the experiences in Afghanistan, and CEDU all put together. When I talk to a therapist these days, there's no distinguishing present behaviors and their causes and saying this happened because of CEDU and this happened because of Afghanistan. Because the experiences were so similar that the reactions and the behaviors I exhibit now can't be attributed to one or the other.
Do you think that people who have also experienced CEDU similarly to you will have those same feelings in their own walks of life?
Absolutely. Similar reactions will cause similar behaviors in the future. I'm not a psychologist, so I'm sure there's one out there who's much more qualified to testify to that. But for me, what I've carried on with me after CEDU is, like I said, inability to deal with conflict.
All right, so let me just pick up then where we were when we just disconnected then. Are you familiar with the Seadoo documentary by Liam Sheff?
Yes.
It's the only Seadoo documentary I'm aware of that actually exists.
Mm-hmm. As of now, yes.
And it explores different people's journeys at Seadoo and goes into the types of things that residents were subjected to.
I've seen it many times. I'm heartbroken by Liam's suicide. I think he had done a great deal of work. I think he had a great deal more work to do. His loss was a huge blow to all of us survivors that are trying to get the story out. And I think he did a wonderful job with it. It's very heavily viewed, and everything I've seen of it, and I've seen each segment many times, is very much on point. So
I think it's definitely still available online. So I will post a link in the show notes for anybody that would be interested in watching that documentary. Liam did unfortunately take his own life, but from what I read in Medium Anonymous's article, it was as a result of chronic pain after some extensive dental work.
yes.
But we'll never know if some of that, if some of the reasoning behind his decision had any link to Seadoo. But
Demons are always there whispering in our ears. That's just human nature. And unfortunately, whatever the cause, it's a great blow, a great loss to us all.
It seems that Liam's one of the only major sources I could find trying to blow the whistle on Seadoo and blow everything open. Of course, there's yourself with the screenplay you've written. Lathrop, we mentioned, she's got a memoir she's writing. Part of it is available on her website, Whiteout, which I did include in last week's show notes. There's Zach Bonney's memoir we've spoken about. There's Medium Anonymous's article. Why do you think it's taken 40 years almost for these stories to be told and documentaries like Liam's to come to light and blow the door open on Seadoo?
Well, the first thing is the fact that it wasn't really until Bill Lane did an interview with Lon Woodbury back in, I believe it was the early 2010s. He did an interview about the Seadoo and Synanon connection.
Okay.
And that was the first time that many, many people put two and two together for the first time. I think the revelation, I had never heard of Synanon until I heard that interview. That started me on a process of research about what it was that I had gone through. Those of us that went through it, that are damaged by it, which the number is many, are still processing our own after effects and not really concerned with revisiting it on a grand scale. That, as well as the powers that are behind it, the sheer amount of money that was put into the system, the powerful people behind it all. Like I mentioned before, Nancy Reagan and her favorite Straight Ink, which was a derivative program, to Mitt Romney and Bain Capital, who are heavily invested in the troubled teen industry today. In fact, both of Mitt Romney's past campaign managers have been board members on troubled teen institution school boards.
Oh, okay.
So the people that are profiting from this industry are profiting greatly, and they are powerful. They spin a completely different narrative, the same one that was presented by Seadoo itself and Synanon before Chuck got his hands unscrewing that all up.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got the Friends of CEDU Foundation, which, as I understand, has changed their name within the past few years.
Yes, I think, yeah.
But as far as I know, last time I looked it up, they still had $500,000 in assets. So you go on beyond that to the other graduates who have been through the program and say, well, it saved my life. I wouldn't be who I am.
Yeah.
And then you go to even other survivors like myself who don't want to hurt their parents. There's a lot of guilt involved when you go through something like this, and not just for yourself, but from your family that was also conned in many ways. So survivors that are willing to step forward and try to set the narrative and blow this whistle are swimming upstream harder than any salmon ever did.
Yep.
And there's at this point, great unity amongst survivors. There's no large base or foundation of people that want to stand up and say something. Those that do have to sensationalize it ridiculously, i.e. Adam Eggett's interview on Joe Rogan. If you look at it, the title is that I spent 2.5 years in a cult when I was a teenager. We're not cultists. We are unwilling adolescents and children that were sent to an institution designed by and started by cult members using Synanon's cult methods applied to non-willing participants. There was no, willing nature to the whole thing. And that in and of itself creates for an atmosphere that you're kind of screaming into the void. Even after the big budget, I believe it was $15 million they put into the boot camp movie back in 2009. It only made 1.1 million at the box office. And nobody, even though it opened with a disclaimer about how these unmonitored and unregulated troubled teen institutions and boot camps are still proliferated throughout the country and the world, nobody cared. They were entertained and they said, oh, okay, cool. But now that Synanon connection has been made within the last 5 to 10 years, we can really see the origins of CEDU, the CEDU schools and programs, and the troubled teen industry as a whole for what it actually was.
Yeah.
And that is allowing us to have a foundation to say, this is how Synanon became applied to unwilling kids. Instead of trying to come out there and describe our daily lives and our experiences, we can point to something that people are familiar with. So I fully expect that the database of information and exposure about not only CEDU, the CEDU programs, and the troubled teen industry as a whole to grow, but I wholly expect and hope that it grows by leaps and bounds, and that certain things like this podcast in itself can open people's eyes and get that curiosity for those materials to the forefront. The more people that see what's already out there, the more people will ask questions about how it was allowed to go on for so long and why it still is. And then we can affect more change.
Yep. Especially as we've mentioned, it is something that still exists today, and children are still being sent to these places. So even if, a handful of parents happen to listen to these types of conversations and maybe second guess a judge's decision or a psychiatrist's advice to send their children to these types of places, we can only hope that these platforms can offer that insight to people who otherwise wouldn't know. I mean, like Medium Anonymous said, the allegations of abuse were going all the way back to the 60s. It's now 2020, and still people are saying CEDU, Synanon, how are they linked? Or what is CEDU? Or what is the troubled teen industry? And what do you mean kids are being abused every day?
Well, I'm hoping that again, podcasts like yours and other outlets will be able to put out there how we were unwilling victims of Synanon.
Absolutely.
Generations, thousands of kids, billions of dollars. But the primary point that I hope is taken away is this was cult methods being applied to unwilling children, and there's no shame in it. Our parents and us were all conned by Synanon devotees. The entire system, judges, politicians, everyone was conned by Synanon devotees. And there is no shame towards yourself or your family for speaking out after being conned by these folks about how much it's affected your life. And you know what? If it saved your life, then good on you. I'm not going to try to take that away from you. But at the same time, I'm not going to excuse it or allow anyone else to excuse it based upon that confirmation bias.
And other testimonies of people who unfortunately did not have that experience of being saved, or, you know,
Yes.
or growing emotionally, or...
I did way more drugs in my 20s after CEDU than I did before I got sent there.
Which is another thing I mentioned, because at the end of Synanon, after everything that Chuck did, after everything he preached and the years of abuse that he inflicted on other people, he was found in a drunken stupor, and the whole story started with him being a drunk in AA. So if that doesn't tell us anything about Synanon and Seadoo, then I don't think anything.
And I'll add the same thing about CEDU. When you look up staff and ex-staff, if you can find them online, I won't name who. Well, you know what? I will. Look up Rudy Bentz. He's got himself a Facebook Messenger profile, but it's him standing in the woods with his AR-15 shouldered to the sky and a come get me look on his face. Innocent people don't post pictures like that. That in itself is another confession of, we know we abused kids.
Yeah.
So it goes on.
Now that we've covered all of those sections, and I think you've spoken very, very honestly and very passionately about the change that we can hope comes from, you know, these conversations. I just wanted to end on going over a little bit more of the bite model that I tend to look at with my podcast episodes, which is Stephen Hassan's cult behavior model. We've been speaking for weeks and weeks. We've exchanged a very long chain of emails where you've given me your experiences under the bite model. The first question I had leading into exploring this is that if the residents were unwilling participants of CEDU as a cult, were the staff themselves indoctrinated willingly into CEDU as a cult?
Yes, absolutely. The staff knew when they were hired that at some point they would be expected to go through the program, and they were happy to do so. Most of that staff, when contacted, felt that they were benefiting from it themselves and had belief in the method. Whether or not they knew that it was the Synanon method, they still agreed with it and believed in it, or they wouldn't be working there. You mentioned Medium Anonymous and the concerned group of employees later in the 2000s that tried to speak out and were promptly dismissed. So if you didn't go through the program as a staff member and buy into it 100%, you didn't work there very long.
So with that in mind, with the behavior, information, thoughts, and emotion control of the bite model, there was clothing regulation, there was forced diets, there was withheld meals. We'll go into some of those in a second, but all of these restrictions and all of these things that were enforced on the residents, were they also used by the staff? So, for example, if there's a clothing regulation for residents, did that apply to the staff as well?
The staff would go along with it for the most part.
Okay.
Whether or not it's because they believed in it, I don't believe that the school was trying to prevent them from having an image of themselves. I think it was more of they had to display the uniform while they were there. In their private lives, I'm sure they wore whatever the heck they wanted. But yeah, that clothing, nothing with logos, nothing with too bright of colors, nothing black. Because that's more of a noir image that kids would have in the 90s. It wasn't quite goth years yet, but the same thing applied. So it all had to be pastel colors, jeans, no athletic logos, pop culture references of any kind. Very plain. Plaids were okay as long as they weren't too bright or included too many blacks. Things of that nature. It was all wilderness and sterile clothing. If you brought anything that was out of agreement, it was taken from you during in-processing, and an updated shopping list was sent to your parents to have sent to you.
And what would happen to the items that were confiscated? Did you ever get those back?
No.
So what
they were either mailed home to your parents or
okay.
taken with them when they left campus or something like that.
So if you ever, because I know a lot of people have their bags searched immediately when you arrive on your dorm. So if you were to have brought with you, you know, some items of value, they usually would make their way back to your parents.
Absolutely.
Okay. And you mentioned that meals were portioned, and those that were considered overweight were put on diets?
Yes, there were certain things, like if you started gaining weight, they would start by saying, okay, you can't have any milk with your meals, you got to stick to water, or they'd say don't take as much food. And then it was more of, instead of restricting your food intake directly, if you started gaining, you would be put into a rap about your lack of self-control, and you would be torn apart about it until you wanted to diet. The actual food deprivation was more in profits, situations where food was a part of your history, like people who were emotional binge eaters before they got there. Food would be used as a therapeutic tool against you. You faced more of sleep deprivation, particularly in the profits and things of that in workshops. Stress positions were a big thing. You go into those profits, some of the stress positions they put you in would make a drill sergeant blush. There were other psychological abuses that I think were even worse, where a kid might not be food deprived, but they will be made to not be hungry for days or weeks on end.
Wow. Okay.
Where they would be hurt so much emotionally by filling their plate in the DFAC that of course they're going to go food starved.
So if you say, for example, you know, I've been at CEDU, staff have noticed that I'm gaining a little bit of weight, and they suggest to me not to have, you know, something extra with my dinner. Is it then psychological that you know you're going to be attacked for that in wraps, so you stop yourself from carrying out those actions? Like, do you preempt the fact that you're going to be attacked?
Absolutely. Anything to avoid it.
So if staff give you a suggestion, you're straight away.
If you don't take it, you're gonna hear about it.
Okay. And the magazines, TV, internet?
We were pretty much football on Sundays. And then Sunday nights, they had a movie night with a pre-selected movie, always something rated G, PG at the most, but it had to be inspirational, very much like the music, very sterile, very emotional, very like, inspirational movies. Nothing with gratuitous violence, nothing with any sex, nothing with anything really interesting, so to speak, but if you were on consequences of any type or out of agreement, you missed out on it. You were in dishes for the whole time. Or you were all day on work assignments on Sunday instead of watching TV. As far as news, I remember they pulled out the TV once. Not even when Kurt Cobain died did we watch the news. But when the Northridge earthquake happened, I remember they pulled out the TV, called off everything, including wraps for that day, and we all watched TV because a lot of the kids were from Southern California.
Right, okay.
Other than that, complete information control. No newspapers, no magazines, no television, there was no internet really at the time. 93, 94, it was all online chatting, and they didn't have computers at the school. Okay. At least not that I ever used.
I read that there was a very small selection of pre-approved books that you could read.
Yes, and of course, pre-approved. Everybody had a copy of The Prophet. You could read that at any time. Otherwise, the library was very small, and it was, again, very much like the movies or the music. It was all along the theme of what they were trying to impart. Anything that deviated from that or gave you any ideas outside of the CEDU program, they weren't having it.
And you were encouraged to keep an eye on each other and, obviously in wraps, you could be pulled up by another resident for something that you did or didn't do at any point. So it was encouraged for you to snitch on each other as residents.
There were two major methods that they did this. That was through use of what were called dirt lists and wrap requests. Dirt lists were things that you needed to keep. Anytime you broke an agreement, you needed to write it down and put it out there in the next wrap. If you didn't, God forbid somebody saw it, because they would have to write it down and then fill out what's called a wrap request to confront you on it in an attack therapy wrap session. Otherwise, they were in more severe trouble than you were in for doing it in the first place. So, if two people saw you break an agreement, God help you. Because now you had wrap requests up the wazoo, and 2, 3, 4, 5, however many people witnessed you break this agreement had to all put in that wrap request, and they would all attack you in the wrap session.
It's a really difficult one, that, because if they don't do it, then themselves, they are going to be the subject of the attack. So
if 5 people saw you do something out of agreement and only 4 of them filled out a wrap request, those 4 people would attack you on it in the wrap, but then the staff would ask, was there anybody else there that saw this? That was a question every time. Did anybody else see this? Was anybody else involved? And those 4 people would have to say, if one of them said X person was with us and
the other 3 didn't,
and the other 3 didn't, those 3 would get toasted. And if all 4 of them, as most likely would happen, said, yeah, this person was with us, then that person would be brought into the next wrap. And it would be an even worse scene for them than it was for you breaking the agreement in the first place.
How did that affect the dynamic between residents?
Never trust anyone.
So you're constantly living not only with the anxiety of the staff and what they're going to do next, especially you with the particular staff member that you had in charge of you. You've also got other residents.
This information, even if you were able to create a friendship or a relationship with another student deep enough that you could break a rule with that person and neither of you come out with it on a dirt list or wrap request, down the road, 2-3 weeks later, that student might be getting attacked on an entirely other matter in a wrap session. And in order to save their skin, they might just come out and say, well, at some point the staff would say, what other dirt do you have?
Right.
They'd be in your face. You got to have all sorts of dirt right now. What else have you got? And they would come out in a panic. They would say, well, Michael and I pop off together.
Oh.
Next thing you know, there goes that little agreement. And that kind of a relationship and agreement in the first place was against the rules and out of agreement. So just having that type of relationship where you could pop off with forbidden songs with someone was a punishable offense in itself.
That reminds me of another documentary I've watched where in the prison system in America, for example, where people are so inmates are so sort of preoccupied by where the white supremacists go, where the people of color go. You know, there's all different sections in the actual prison for people from different ethnic backgrounds, and they keep these people so focused on arguing amongst each other and staying within their own territories that they don't question those in charge. So it's almost like the staff are pinning you against each other so much that you're more worried about each other than actually taking a step back and saying, hang on a minute, like, we know something's wrong here, but we're not talking about it because we're too worried about each other.
Absolutely. And the worst part of that is that you don't really see it coming from the staff. Because you'll go into a rap and you'll be so worried about a couple of things that have gone on between you and other students, you won't see it when that staff pulls something from your history from way before CEDU that they had a discussion with your parents about at some point and throw it in your face. And now all of a sudden you got to run your stuff on that, all the while never seeing it coming in the first place because you're so worried about this student
everything
or that
else,
student and what they've got on you and what you've got on them. That
so
whole dynamic.
The
bottom line, never trust anybody. Any type of relationship that you make that goes beyond what they allow is subject to exposure. And when it's exposed, that power struggle of consequence, that ever increasing level of consequences will be on you.
And after these rap sessions where people have, you know, you've written your dirt lists, you know, they've put their requests in, you've had this attack therapy, you're supposed to all lay down together and have a smushing session together, which is essentially just everybody getting into one giant human huddle and cuddling up with each other, staff included.
Absolutely. Staff were usually at the center of each individual smush pile, and the piles were so large that they would merge into one another. There are plenty of pictures available online in different places about it, how it worked and examples of it. Smushing was a tool that they used for many, many reasons. One of which, it evolved from early CEDU when sex was allowed between students. They were adults, there were some adolescents, but in the early 60s and early 70s, or late 60s, early 70s, the first years of CEDU, there were a bunch of adults that were in it, much like Synanon, before it really went strictly adolescents and children. And there was a lot of sex going on. There was, you know, all through the 70s, it was a hotbed of orgies, just like Synanon.
Okay.
When they went full adolescence and for profit, they had to take sex out of it entirely. But the relic that was smushing, that facilitated these orgies and this sex that was rampant in early CEDU, kept on because it was useful. You were expected to tell your life story to a different student or staff member twice a week. And that was the time that they reserved for you to do that. Okay. So over the course of your stay at that school, you pretty much were expected to smush with everyone and tell everyone your entire life story and hear theirs back.
It's very confusing.
Were doing it while intimate with someone that had just screamed their brains out at you not an hour earlier about what a piece of shit you are.
It's not only that, but the fact that you're not even allowed to make eye contact or hold hands with or converse too long with somebody that in a different environment you can cuddle with and lay with and be, you know, intimate with without having actual sexual contact.
Right.
And for teenagers with hormones running rampant and then being
Oh,
told
yeah.
that actually, you know, sex isn't allowed, you can listen to staff talk about all the sex that they've had in their disclosures. Right. How do you process this as a teenager?
With a whole lot of angst and confusion.
Mm-hmm.
It made you question your sexuality for some kids.
Mm-hmm.
Because not only were you made to smush with people of the opposite sex, but the same sex as well. More often with people of the same sex, because if you smushed with someone of the opposite sex too many times, you now had a sexual contract, mm-hmm. and that was a whole new ball of wax. So,
and then you're on bands from each other.
Oh yeah, and worse, and one of you or both of you are getting put on a full time, and there's a, you know, it gets bad. So okay. You have to rotate people, number one. So even people you don't know, don't like, you have to smush with them.
Okay.
Staff as well, like you said, right in the middle of it. If you're trying to be a man apart and kind of, you know, all right, I'm just going to rest my shoulder up against yours, the staff member at the center of the smush pile is going to grab you and put your head right on that person's lap and say, okay. Start smushing, stop being so standoffish.
And how often do the smushes happen? Are they after every rap
every
session?
Every day.
You arrive at Seadoo, you talked at the beginning of our interview about being absolutely turned upside down from being dropped off and you know, almost abandoned at Seadoo, having your cavity searched.
That's the lucky ones of us. Those who were kidnapped and escorted by Bill Lane and Associates, it was even more disconcerting because you woke up the morning prior to two guys on either side of your bed with zip ties telling you can come the hard way or the easy way.
That's horrific. That's horrible. When I was reading that,
and your parents standing in the doorway with, you know, shaking and crying because they're whatever they're feeling. But literally, these people grab you and then transport you halfway across the country. Sometimes, literally in zip ties, you can go up to. Therapeutic transportation has become so big thanks to Bill Lane and Associates. Mm-hmm. The TSA knows what it is. So kids will have these two giant ex-military guys standing on either side of them with zip ties over their heads, being paraded through the airport, and they can go to TSA and say, I don't know these guys, they're kidnapping me. Look, they're holding me hostage. Wow. These guys will pull out a piece of paper. TSA will be like, we've seen this. Therapeutic transport, on with you guys.
So you're taken, you're at Seadoo, you have your first day, you have your rap, and then at the end of it, you're just pushed into some random person's lap and expected on that first day that you arrived there to just tell this person your life story. How confusing is that?
Not just that, but I'm willing to wager this is the story for the majority of people in my situation, but you were put into your first rap with your new family head.
Okay.
The school was broken into families that were led by different people. They were the senior staff there. There were usually 4 of them at CEDU, 4 families, if I remember correctly, about 25 kids each through all different phases of the program. But that family head would have you in your first rap. And then after that first rap, while you were looking at this huge room of smushing people, completely wrecked from being destroyed, your first rap ever, that same family head would be the one to drag you into your first smush pot.
Right.
So it would be those very same people who just attacked you on your first day in your first attack therapy session that you were forced to smush with on your first smush. So the maximum amount of disequilibrium they could inspire within you on your first day was what they did.
Okay. And for new people new residents arrive into Seadoo, was there ever like any hazing that took place? Would other students, would they go out of their way to make life more difficult, or was it kind of more of a unspoken sort of, oh, you really don't know what's going to happen whilst you're here?
And just like anywhere else, there was a lot of dynamic between the kids. Some liked each other, some did not.
Mm-hmm.
Some personalities meshed, some personalities clashed. There was no, you couldn't build friendships the way you wanted to without fear of being confronted for
Mm-hmm.
something. So
the last point that I had personally, I know that obviously we've spoken about how sex wasn't allowed, but it appears that it actually did happen on some occasions, because there's been some speculation that actually some residents would receive abortions whilst attending CEDU. Is that something that you've heard about personally?
Personally, no, but I can say to point in that direction, there was sex going on.
Okay.
It happened. Anybody who was there in the late 90s and early 2000s will tell you that. It became more frequent as the Brown schools got involved.
Okay.
That kind of became more of a thing, but nobody had kids there. That's for sure. And there sure as hell was no birth control.
Right. Okay.
So if a student became pregnant, no other students heard about it or knew about it. Mm-hmm. So either these 14, 15, 16, and 17-year-old kids are better at, pardon my term, the pull-out method than grown adults, mm-hmm. or something else is going on there.
Okay, yeah. I wasn't too sure about that one, but I just wanted to bring that up.
Fortunately or unfortunately, I couldn't say, never really had a sexual encounter while I was there. Okay. Let alone had to deal with the repercussions of it. And as a male, I wouldn't have been involved with that. I wouldn't have even known if the female student I was with had gotten pregnant. Okay. So that would be something that the female students alone could really give testimony to.
Okay. Well, the more people talk, who knows, what else will come out from these types of conversations. I don't know if you had anything to add.
No, you are a
wonderfully
thorough podcaster. I do appreciate the opportunity to speak to you and to your audience on this matter, and I really do hope that it inspires a whole lot of curiosity and future revelation about the matter. That's what's needed to stop it from its continued existence, and to, the adage is true. Those who don't learn from the past are doomed to repeat it. And more kids are suffering every day because of this, at literally the hands of Synanon and Synanon-derived programs all over the country and world.
Absolutely. I mean, you're completely right. And I'm so appreciative for your candid experience, and your sharing your knowledge with everybody, and just letting the listeners of this small podcast understand a little bit more about the goings on at CEDU. And hopefully there will be more dialogue that starts from this. You've got your screenplay that you're working on, which I've personally read, and it's fantastic.
Thank you.
No, it's true. There's other memoirs I've read that are very enlightening. I just hope that, as you've said, hopefully we can just keep going and talking more about it and getting more information out there, especially just to, if anything, stop it from happening still today.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for touching on the subject.
No, thank you, Michael. Thank you. It's been so lovely to sit down and speak to you after talking for so many weeks. It's been great to finally be able to sit down and just, and have this electronic face-to-face meeting finally. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Casey.
Michael's heartfelt and candid interview definitely helped to shed some light on the years of child abuse that thousands have endured and still experience today. I had an email just yesterday from a troubled teen industry survivor who was asked to remain anonymous. I'd like to read their email to give some perspective on an eerily similar experience had by this survivor just 5 years ago. The email read, "I went to a boarding school in rural New Hampshire 5 years ago. I left my second year. There was a strict dress code, teachers monitoring kids' relationships, conversations, behaviours and emotions. I learned certain behaviours were acceptable and some were not. There was required late-night study periods that restricted our sleep. No visitors were allowed on campus unless the dean of students had met and signed them in. No students could leave without being signed out by him. The leader teaches extreme obedience and dependence. He is the typical egotistical, self-obsessed, preachy cult leader. He keeps a few teachers closer to him, and students that show extreme devotion to him get highly praised and rewarded. The dorm parents deal out rewards and punishments to their dorm, like chores, extra food and leisure time in the parents' apartment. Dorm parents also acted as teachers, so gaining points with them obviously made life more tolerable. Every weekend, there were groups of kids who did manual labour in the morning around the school grounds. Teachers were also assigned to groups of kids that were encouraged to share personal thoughts and feelings. When kids got into trouble, there was an inner council they were sent to. The kids got taken in there and would come out different. Some of the kids got shunned, and all the teachers and most of the kids stopped talking to them. After a few months of attending and talking to older kids, I realised very few of our teachers had a degree in education or what they were teaching us. The classes were based on who jumped through their hoops, and the information taught was nonsensical, so my questions were met with public shaming and stares from other kids. Certain kids would get singled out in classes and bullied publicly by teachers. It cost an insane amount to go there, but the leader just had his triple-storey mountainside home built custom, so you can guess where the tuition is going. I call that financial exploitation. We were assigned dorms, so living spaces were controlled as well. The teachers taught us to see our school as elite over the other private and public schools. They discouraged our contact with any outside friends or family. The motto of the school, truth and courage, was pushed on us incessantly by teachers and the leader. It was a bad time in general for me, which I believe is partly the reason for my getting caught up there. There are more weird, awful stories, but I lost a lot of the memories for obvious reasons. I don't think these cult members are really teachers, but for the sake of avoiding confusion, I've referred to them as teachers. This account goes to show that these things are still happening to children today, and we need to start talking about it. This is going to be the end of my series on Synanon and Seadoo. If anything, I hope the information has provided some talking points for people to discuss these events and perhaps provide some knowledge of potential red flags when deciding if a school or residence that works within these guidelines would be most suitable for a child or, quote, troubled teen. If you would like to get in touch, you can do so by emailing me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or find me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod. As usual, I'd quickly like to plug my Patreon and Gofundme pages that are both live. I'm fundraising in order to be able to continue podcasting now that my maternity leave has ended. Likewise, my Patreon is available with exclusive content released monthly for my special patrons, of which Michael Balaban is now one of. So thank you so much for this support, Michael. You are an incredible human being. This month's content for patrons will focus on the Branch Davidians and David Koresh. I'm your speaker, Casey, and this has been the Cult Vault.